Farming upgrade flow, warm daily life, 1v1 dual cleanliness, slow and hot emotional line. Ruan Nanxing accidentally crossed over while testing a holographic game called Medicine Refining and Ascending, and even bound the in-game home system with him. From then on, the boundary between games and reality blurred, and virtual data became real life. Ruan Nanxing, who arrived alone in the Immortal realm, relied on the home system and embarked on a unique path of cultivation. Is the land barren? Home water wells can improve soil quality. Is there a scarcity of spiritual plants? The upgraded vegetable garden comes with a new variety. Is the spirit beast extinct? Even hybrid spirit beasts can withstand half of the sky. Unconsciously, the barren hilltop was filled with rare spiritual plants, and divine-level spiritual beasts ran around the mountain. The rich spiritual energy startled the immortals in the upper realm. The newly added male host on the mountain is even more chilling to watch. Why is this small hill in the lower world so terrifying? Small theater. The hen brought out by Ruan Nanxing from his home attracted a phoenix. Huifeng has not seen a female for many years, and quickly formed a new cross-species family with the hen. At the beginning, Ruan Nanxing was both surprised and delighted to see its success. Not long after, Ruan Nanxing began to regret it. Huifeng guarded tightly and refused to give her a single egg to eat. Later on, those eggs broke through one after another, and a group of little chicks with red fur emerged. Keywords of the novel. No pop-ups after crossing the fairy world with the home system. Download the complete TXT collection after crossing the fairy world with the home system, and read the latest chapters after crossing the fairy world with the home system. Chapter 1. Game Bugs. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Game bugs. A loud thunderous roar, accompanied by dazzling lightning, swept open the dim night sky. Not long after, raindrops the size of nails splashed down, knocking on the glass exterior walls of the technology building with a crackling sound. It's raining rainstorm. It seems that today we have to live in the company again. A baby-faced girl by the window sighed. A tired, hoarse male voice rang out from across the street. It's been almost half a month now. I thought you were used to it a long time ago. The company is my second home, said the doll with a tearless face. The man across from him poked his head out from behind the monitor and said, speaking of home, Mr. Ruan is the real head of the company. It is said that he hasn't gone back much in the past 2 months. The doll nodded in agreement. After all, refining medicine and ascending is Mr. Nguyen's first main project and also China's first holographic game. It's finally going to be tested internally, so of course she needs to keep an eye on it. As babyface guest, Ruan Nanxing plans to test himself before the official internal test tomorrow. Although the server has not been turned on yet, some basic functions can still be used. Ruan Nanxing took off his glasses, put on a holographic helmet, found a comfortable position on the lounge chair, and then activated the helmet for consciousness connection. After a brief period of darkness, Ruan Nanxing entered the initial interface, which is the stage of character shaping. The scanning system on the helmet will model the user's face, which is the initial image of the game character. If you are not satisfied, you can adjust the data yourself to generate your favorite image. Ruan Nanxing herself is a cool and charming beauty, wearing golden framed glasses on weekdays, with a kind of abstinence beauty. Normally, there is no need to adjust her facial data, but for testing purposes, she moved every value. Very smooth, the image will change in real time based on numerical values, very easy to control, good. Ruan Nanxing nodded in satisfaction, confirmed the game image, and officially entered the game interface. At first, it was a thick fog. Welcome to Medicine Refining and Ascension, and I wish you a unique life experience. A sweet female voice sounded in her ear, and Ruan Nanxing frowned. This voice was a bit too sweet, it's best to change it. The next second, the mist dispersed and Ruan Nanxing appeared in a small farmyard. She looked back and forth and found that the yard was not large, but well equipped, with wooden houses as the dividing line. In front of the house was a chicken coop, behind the house was a vegetable garden, and next to it was a well. Modeling is very thoughtful, and everything is done to recreate the appearance in reality, looking very realistic. Including some small items inside the house, such as bowls and chopsticks, wooden combs, water cups, etc., the touch is very realistic. There are 3 wooden houses. The main entrance leads to the dining room, the right side is the bedroom, and the left side is the alchemy room. The main focus of Medicine Refining Ascension is the medicine refining system. Although there are other professions, the medicine refining room in the initial home is a must-have and will only be taken back after a job transfer. As the top priority of this game, Ruan Nanxing has been testing in the alchemy room for the longest time. All kinds of spiritual medicines have perfect shapes, with delicate details, even the small hairs on the leaves have been replicated. At the moment when fingers touch the medicinal herbs, the name, function, and usage method of the herbs will be automatically transmitted to the game character's brain. But only for the first time, the second touch will not trigger this function. After igniting the alchemy furnace, one can also feel a significant change in the surrounding temperature. The green and astringent aroma when processing medicinal materials, as well as the rich medicinal fragrance in the later stage of refining, all give a sense of being there. It seems that this is not a game, but a real world. After the pill was made, Ruan Nanxing took one, which felt slightly hot to the touch. She smiled indifferently and put the pill into her mouth. The feeling of chewing and swallowing is very real, and the energy of the pill spreads in the abdomen, spreading to all limbs and bones. The whole process lasted for about 5 minutes, and after that, Ruan Nanxing felt a sense of strength all over his body. The effect of the pill was very good. She stretched lazily and comfortably exhaled a breath. She had been tense all this time, and her body was stiff. It had been a long time since she felt so relaxed. Ruan Nanxing felt that she was just too worried and smiled helplessly. She sighed softly, "Forget it, let's wait until tomorrow to test together with everyone." Speaking, Ruan Nanxing walked to the bedroom and lay on the bed waiting to log out. Under normal circumstances, lying flat on the bed for 10 to 15 seconds, keeping still, can successfully log out of the game. But Ruan Nanxing lay down for a minute, but his consciousness was still in the game. There is an issue with the logout operation. Ruan Nanxing frowned and stood up, with no signs of panic on his face. This situation was naturally expected by them, and there were backup mandatory logout measures, but the occurrence of this problem on the eve of internal testing was clearly not a good omen. Ruan Nanxing tapped on the 3rd cylinder at the head of the bed, counting from the outside to the inside. A thick white mist suddenly appeared, but the prompt sound for logging out of the game never sounded. Ruan Nanxing's eyebrows furrowed even tighter. This basic mistake should not have occurred. The thick fog dissipated in the blink of an eye, but Ruan Nanxing stood still in shock. In front of her was not her office, nor the familiar game scenes, but a strange and desolate land. Surrounded by uneven loess, with few plants, not to mention humans, not a single insect can be seen. After a pause, Ruan Nanxing felt a surge of unease in her heart. She raised her hand and touched her eyes, but without glasses, she shouldn't have seen so clearly. She faces the computer all year round and has nearly 300 degrees of myopia. Without glasses, her face looks blurry 3 meters away, and it is even more difficult to see clearly whether there are insects in the bushes 10 meters away. What's going on? She hasn't left the game smoothly yet. Ruan Nanxing took a deep breath, closed his eyes and silently recited, "Return to home." This is a convenient operation in the game. No matter where you are, as long as you silently recite home, the system will automatically teleport the game characters back to their initial home. Opening his eyes again, Ruan Nanxing returned to the small courtyard. She breathed a sigh of relief for no reason, as she had not logged out yet, but what was going on in that scene? She has no impression at all. Ruan Nanxing pursed her lips. If this situation cannot be resolved tonight, tomorrow's internal test may be postponed. She sighed with a headache, and Ruan Nanxing tried to force herself out again. The thick fog rose and dissipated, and she returned to that barren land. Can't get out. Ruan Nanxing is a bit restless, and if he can't, he can only cancel his account and log out directly. She was about to return to the courtyard when a timid child voice suddenly came from behind. Sister, do you want the fruit over there? Ruan Nanxing's pupils shrank, revealing a hint of disbelief. There could be no other person in the game. She turned around and looked behind her, a half-person tall girl who looked 5 or 6 years old, with tattered clothes and a small but clean figure. The girl blinked and gathered her courage again, shouting, Sister, can I pick the fruit? Ruan Nanxing's mind was very confused, and he nodded subconsciously upon hearing the words. The girl laughed happily and quickly walked over to her side, squatting down and picking the small red fruits from the bushes. While picking them, she boasted, I knew my sister would agree. She looks very gentle. She must be a good person. Ruan Nanxing has a cold and charming appearance, surrounded by various adjectives since adolescence, saying she is a royal sister, aloof, bright and beautiful, queen. But no one has ever said she is gentle. This word is completely opposite to her, probably due to adjusting the initial data. Her face has undergone some changes. The girl continued, Sister is so beautiful, even more beautiful than the village flowers in our village. Village. Ruan Nanxing's heart trembled again, as a home was set up. There was no village setting in medicine refining and ascension, only a city and a country. The girl nodded and said something else. But Ruan Nanxing could no longer hear her, her ears buzzing and she was completely surrounded by panic. What exactly is this place? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Finding a Residence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Finding a Residence. Ruan Nanxing followed the girl to the village she mentioned, and she had some speculations about the current situation that urgently needed to be confirmed or overturned. The village was not far away, and after walking for less than 10 minutes, Ruan Nanxing saw a well-arranged small courtyard. At this time, the sun is westward and the sunshine is warm. Many people, old or young, are active outside, but there are no young or middle-aged people. Most importantly, these people, regardless of gender, have long hair. Before entering the village, Ruan Nanxing had already heard the chatter of family members. This scene is too unfamiliar. Ruan Nanxing has confirmed that she has somehow entered a completely unfamiliar world and is facing her body generated by in-game data. Thinking of this, Ruan Nanxing suddenly paused, pulled out a small knife from his waist to handle medicinal herbs, and cut it into his palm. In an instant, bright red blood gushed out from the wound. Ruan Nanxing seemed to feel no pain, staring blankly at the wound on her hand. The game's basic setting states that characters cannot harm themselves. But now, she's injured and bleeding. Moreover, it was not until this moment that she realized the texture of the skin on the back of her hand was so clear, and there were faint blue blood vessels beneath her skin, just like a real person. Sister. What are you doing? The girl's anxious and afraid voice sounded, calling back Ruan Nanxing's rationality. She just wanted to stab her heart and see if she would die, it's ridiculous. Ruan Nanxing closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, he was the rational and calm Mr. Ruan. She squatted down and looked at the girl, her eyes filled with gentle comfort. Sister just wanted to confirm one thing, it scared you. Sister apologizes to you, she said. The girl looked at her cautiously and asked, have you confirmed it? Will you never cut yourself again in the future? Ruan Nanxing's voice fell imperceptibly low, it has been confirmed. The girl breathed a sigh of relief and tugged at Ruan Nanxing's sleeve. Sister, the wound needs to be treated quickly. Let's walk faster. There is a medical clinic in the village. Ruan Nanxing agreed and walked through the village under the guidance of the girl. Along the way, she met many people. The girl politely greeted them one by one, and the adults responded with smiles. At the same time, they thought they were secretly observing Ruan Nanxing, but the latter ignored them. Not long after, a big and small group arrived at a large courtyard where many medicinal herbs were dried. The old pharmacist with white hair and a goatee was sitting on the steps of the courtyard, processing the newly picked herbs in the bamboo basket. The old pharmacist heard the commotion and looked up. The girl anxiously said, "Grandpa Yang. Sister is injured and has shed a lot of blood." Ruan Nanxing also whispered, "Thank you." Yang Yaoshi glanced at the wound on her hand and stood up, saying, "Come in." He then turned around and walked into the room. The layout of the room is very similar to the traditional Chinese medicine museum in Ruan Nanxing's impression. The entire wall is filled with small drawer-style medicine cabinets, but there is no counter in front of the cabinets, but a rectangular table. Yang Yaoshi gestured for Ruan Nanxing to sit at the table, while he himself walked around to the back of the table, opened a drawer on the medicine cabinet, and took out a white porcelain bottle. Yang Yaoshi sat down opposite Ruan Nanxing, opened the porcelain bottle, and poured some brown powder into the plate on the table. The girl shrank her neck when she saw this, as if she was a bit scared. However, the next second she tried to straighten her back and said seriously with a small face, "Sister, don't be afraid. This medicine powder doesn't hurt at all." Ruan Nanxing said, "Thank you, sister. I'm not afraid of pain." As soon as he finished speaking, a sharp pain came from the wound on the back of his hand, and tears uncontrollably welled up in Ruan Nanxing's eyes. It was too painful. Yang Yaoshi said in a low voice, "It does hurt a bit, but this medicine works well and will be good tomorrow." Ruan Nanxing has just finished talking big in front of the children, and at this moment, he can't face himself. This matter concerns the face and dignity of adults. Upon hearing this, he could only purse his lips and nodded, whispering his gratitude. He listened carefully, his words clearly trembling. The girl looked at her sister with admiration. How amazing. She must have grown up to be so amazing. Yang Yaoshi lifted his eyelids and glanced at her, asking, "Where does the girl come from?" Ruan Nanxing paused and lowered her eyes, saying, "I don't remember." Yang Yaoshi was not surprised at all and asked, "Did the girl decide where to go after that?" Ruan Nanxing sighed lightly, "I have no plans at the moment." She had just accepted the fact of her time travel and had not had time to consider future things. Yang Yaoshi nodded casually and said, "There is a barren mountain near the east of the village, which is an unknown place. If you really have nowhere to go, you can temporarily settle there." Upon hearing this, Ruan Nanxing was somewhat surprised. If she were to settle down, with so many residents in the village, wouldn't anyone be able to take her in? How do you feel that Yang Yaoshi doesn't really want her to stay in the village? Thinking so in his heart, Ruan Nanxing sincerely thanked him. The girl said actively on the side, "I know where it is, sister. I'll take you there." Ruan Nanxing was about to agree when Yang Yaoshi said to the girl, You, your mother was just looking for you. You should go home first. Sister is an adult now, and you can find your way on your own." Ruan Nanxing's expression remained unchanged, but he felt a bit helpless in his heart. Indeed, he was rejected. Yu is a bit conflicted. She wants to stay with her sister for a while longer, but she dare not disobey her mother. Ruan Nanxing whispered, "You should go home first. Don't let your mother worry, thank you for guiding me." You shook your head and said, "You're welcome, I like my sister." After taking 2 steps, you turned back and asked eagerly, "Sister, can I come and play with you tomorrow?" Ruan Nanxing's eyes showed a hint of laughter as he nodded and said, "Welcome at any time." Yu smiled happily, waved his hand at the two, and bounced away. Ruan Nanxing's hand was already bandaged, and she stood up to thank Yang Yaoshi. Then, feeling a bit embarrassed, she said, "I'm sorry, I'm penniless now." Yang Yaoshi waved his hand and said, "No problem, when your hands are ready, come and help me collect medicine for the day." Ruan Nanxing's heart relaxed slightly, nodded in agreement, and then thanked him again, walking towards the east of the village. Without Yuyu's companionship, there were more people observing her along the way, and everyone's eyes were filled with scrutiny and vigilance. Ruan Nanxing was puzzled. Could it be that this village had been deceived by strangers before, which is why it is so unfriendly to outsiders? The village is not big, and after walking for about 10 minutes, I left. There is indeed a small mountain outside the village, which is only 200 to 300 meters high. There are very few plants on the mountain, and there is loess everywhere, as if it is going to sand. Ruan Nanxing hesitated as he stood at the foot of the mountain. Is this kind of mountain really habitable? If it rains a little harder, a landslide will occur. But without hesitation for a long time, Ruan Nanxing decided to go up the mountain for a simple reason. From the soil in this area, it is clear that there is obvious drought and water shortage. It has not rained for a long time, so she should not be so unlucky. Ruan Nanxing climbed to the top of the mountain in one breath, not blushing or panting. After just a few steps, he saw an abandoned courtyard house. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Initial Cultivation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Initial Cultivation. At this moment, the sky was already dim, and Ruan Nanxing stood in front of the courtyard hesitating. Wild mountains and ridges, vacant houses, dimly lit environments. It all feels like a typical Chinese horror movie opening. And now, her protagonist is also about to appear. Ruan Nanxing took a deep breath and boldly pushed open the door of the courtyard. Anyway, if the situation really isn't right, she can still go back to the home system. The courtyard has double doors, and the slightest touch makes a creaking sound, which is particularly harsh on the quiet mountain. Ruan Nanxing became even more nervous. She looked through the crack in the door and saw a dirty and messy yard, with no weeds, just gray servants, unable to see the color of the floor tiles clearly. She squeezed into the door, thought for a moment, then turned around and completely opened the door, opening it to the fullest. She picked up 2 stones next to her and blocked the door, feeling uneasy. There's no need to worry too much about retreating. The entrance is centered, and upon entering, there is a gatehouse on the left, a kitchen on the right, and a courtyard towards the inside. There is a circle of corridors around the courtyard, and outside the corridors is a circle of houses. Ruan Nanxing went to the room on the right first. The door was not tightly closed and opened with a gentle touch. The sound of squeaking was accompanied by the falling dust, making her hair stand up and her back cool. After a quick glance, she quickly ran back into the courtyard. On the right is a study, with books neatly arranged on the bookshelf, and even pens, ink, paper, and inkstones on the desk, indicating that the owner of this house left in a hurry and never returned. Taking a deep breath, Ruan Nanxing went to the room on the left and ran away at a glance as if it were a bedroom with nothing. It should be a guest room. Finally, there is the house inside. Passing through the corridor, it is a rectangular large house that is probably used to entertain guests. It is separated by 2 screens on the left and right, with a reception room in the middle. On the left is the dining hall, and on the right is the tea room. There is a small courtyard outside the back door of the hall, with a thatched cottage on the left and a washing room on the right. Facing the hall is the master's bedroom, consisting of 2 rooms. After reading it, Ruan Nanxing breathed a sigh of relief. This place was big and dirty, and although it was not dangerous, it was not suitable for living. It's getting late again now, so she can only come back tomorrow to clean up. Tonight, she will still go home to live in the garden. Maybe by sleeping in bed for a night, she can return to her familiar world. Ruan Nanxing returned to her home again, and at this time, her home had also followed the changes in the outside world. The night fell and the bright moon and stars hung on it. She almost fell asleep in the moment she looked up and down. She originally wanted to take a break after watching the game, but didn't expect so many things to happen. With a bitter smile, Ruan Nanxing dragged her heavy footsteps towards the wooden house, but suddenly turned around before entering and looked at the oval-shaped mailbox at the entrance of the small courtyard. This mailbox is used in the game to distribute items and rewards to players. Now that the home system is completely off track, will there be any changes to the functionality of this mailbox? The doubts and curiosity that arose in her heart temporarily suppressed Ruan Nanxing's drowsiness. She walked to the mailbox and opened it, which contained 2 coin-sized paper bags and a letter. Ruan Nanxing opened the letter with a few words written on it, roughly meaning to encourage her to work hard in farming. The more she gains, the more experience she will gain, and both her home and her will be upgraded as a result, obtaining more props and rewards. It was clearly a letter with a clear direction, but after reading it, she became even more confused. The mailbox will only have corresponding functions after the server is turned on. In other words, the mailbox is an official NPC, and its biggest function is to publish tasks and guide players. But in this situation, can the servers in her original world still be connected to the home system? Ruan Nanxing thinks it's impossible. So, the current situation is even more puzzling for her. With a heavy sigh, Ruan Nanxing stopped thinking too much. There was too little information to analyze, so she had to take a step by step to understand the current plan. Anyway, she was alone. Where did she live? Returning to the wooden house, Ruan Nanxing casually placed the paper bag and letter on the table and went directly to the backyard to fetch water, preparing to wash up. When the bucket was placed on the ground, Ruan Nanxing saw his modeling face for the first time. Her facial features are about 70.8% similar to her original appearance, but her facial contours are slightly soft, her skin is fair and delicate, and her almond eyes are much gentler without the cover of lenses. No wonder Yu would say she is gentle. Ruan Nanxing didn't look much, just poured water to wash up. There were basic daily necessities in the wooden house, which were originally just decorations made for the sake of authenticity. Unexpectedly, they would be useful for a day. At the entrance of the well, her almond eyes widened slightly, sweet and refreshing, especially delicious. After rinsing her mouth, Ruan Nanxing couldn't hold back and drank a whole big glass of water. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but after drinking the well water, she felt that all the exhaustion on her body had been swept away. With a hint of surprise, Ruan Nanxing returned to bed to sleep, thinking to herself that the situation didn't seem so bad either. At least the well water was delicious, which surprised her. Ruan Nanxing almost touched the pillow and fell asleep. When she opened her eyes, it was already bright outside. It took a few seconds for her to fully wake up, and then she sighed in a complex mood. As expected, she couldn't go back. After washing up, Ruan Nanxing realized that she didn't feel hungry, even last night. She just felt tired but not hungry. The modeled body, no matter how human it is also different from real people in some aspects. When she used to be busy with work, she always felt like eating was a waste of time. Now that things have improved, she really doesn't need to eat anymore. Ruan Nanxing pondered, since that's the case, doesn't she also need to use the restroom? Isn't she even going to come with her aunt? Thinking of this, her eyes lit up slightly, and she had a slight expectation for her future life. In no hurry to leave home, Ruan Nanxing opened the 2 small paper bags on the table. Inside were indeed seeds, the size of a grain of rice, with about 20 in each bag. She pinched one with her fingers, and the information about the seed automatically came to her mind. Burning heavenly luo, a primary spiritual medicine with fire attributes, has the effect of promoting blood circulation and removing blood stasis, penetrating meridians, and can be used to refine pills such as Daidawan and Tongmaiwan. It is not suitable for water attribute cultivators to take. Ruan Nanxing took out another orange seed from another bag. Sunflower, a primary spiritual medicine with 5 element attributes, has the effect of nourishing the body and restoring physical strength. It can be used to refine resilience pills, strength-enhancing pills, etc., and is suitable for all attribute cultivators. Sure enough, they are all medicinal herbs used for alchemy, and I don't know if they are suitable for this world. But no matter what, it has to be planted. Thinking about it, Ruan Nanxing rolled up her sleeves and went to the vegetable garden. She found tools next to the yard, started digging pits to bury seeds, and finally poured well water. It's easy to say, but as someone who has never been to the ground before, she is indeed very clumsy and inefficient in practice. After finally planting the seeds, her white dress was completely dyed black. Ruan Nanxing lowered her head and sighed, "These clothes are really not suitable for farming. They look ethereal and beautiful, but they are really cumbersome when working." End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Upper and Lower Bounds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Upper and Lower Bounds. Ruan Nanxing took off her dirty clothes and threw them by the well. After washing them clean, she returned to the wooden house naked. She remembered there was a wardrobe in the room. After opening it, there are many sets of clothes hanging inside, with various styles, including a hodgepodge of ancient, modern, Western, and Eastern styles, including prepared underwear and socks. Ruan Nanxing was wearing black sports pants and a sky blue round-necked hoodie, with a pair of rain boots on her feet for easy work. After finishing wearing it, Ruan Nanxing habitually went to close the cabinet door, only to suddenly find that the white dress she had just taken off appeared in the wardrobe. She was taken aback and quickly ran to the well in the backyard to check. The dirty clothes were really gone. She ran back to the wardrobe and grabbed the dress, as white as new, without any dirt. Ruan Nanxing couldn't help but laugh and said, "It's truly the home system. In the future, I will save time washing clothes. When I came out of my home, it was just past noon and the sun was shining brightly. The courtyard no longer had the eerie and terrifying feeling of last night, it was just an old courtyard." Ruan Nanxing breathed a sigh of relief and estimated where to start cleaning. "Let's leave the backyard alone for now. Let's take out the front guest room and kitchen today." Although she can live in her home completely, in the eyes of outsiders, this courtyard is her home. After all, the existence of the home system, like its origin, is difficult for outsiders to know. In the guest room, besides dust, only the bedding on the bed needs to be treated, and it is unknown how long it has been idle. The area above is not dust, but a thick layer of soil. I don't know if there might be mice or insects, but Ruan Nanxing cautiously tapped the bedding with a branch. The next second, dust was flying, and Ruan Nanxing coughed and retreated until he left the room, feeling his breathing smooth. "Sister. Are you there?" Yuyu's voice came from outside the courtyard. Ruan Nanxing walked towards the gate while responding, thinking that only Yuyu was coming. However, it was obvious that the parents of the child were not very confident and followed along. Standing next to Yuyu is a slender woman who looks only in her 20s and has a delicate appearance. When looking at people, she has a slight smile on the corner of her eyes, which can easily make people feel good about her. Ruan Nanxing walked over and politely smiled, "Are you an excellent sister?" The woman and Yuyu were both stunned and immediately laughed together. Ruan Nanxing looked at the two in confusion. The woman smiled and said, "I am Yuyu's mother." Ruan Nanxing was surprised and explained somewhat awkwardly, "Sorry, you look too young, so." The woman waved her hand and smiled even happier. "It's okay, you girl really talks. I'm already over 100 years old, and I've started to wrinkle in the past 2 years." Ruan Nanxing was stunned. How long has a face in its 20s grown from being 100 years old? She instinctively looked towards Yuyu. Yuyu's mother was still saying, "But when I was young, I was indeed the village flower of our village. When I gave birth to Yuyu, I was already considered old." She rubbed Yuyu's head and sighed, "If her father can't come back, I can also be considered as leaving a queen for his Qing family." Ruan Nanxing is confused. "Where did Yuyu father go? Why can't you come back?" Yuyu Nyang paused and said, "Why did I tell you this?" She smiled and said, "Miss, what's your name?" "My surname is Liu, and I only have one Hui character. You can call me Hui. You look very small, so you shouldn't be underage, right?" My name is Ruan Nanxing, I'm already 30 years old. Lu Hui exclaimed, oh, I just said you're young. You've just reached adulthood, and you really should call you sister. Ruan Nanxing is confused again, just reached adulthood at the age of 30. In the blink of an eye, she realized. This world is completely different from what she thought ancient times were. What kind of place did she wear it to? Lu Hui looked at her as she didn't speak and didn't ask much when she saw that she was dressed strangely. Instead, she suddenly realized, you were cleaning, weren't you? This house has been vacant for a long time, so I need to clean it up properly. Then I won't disturb you. She pushed Yu towards Ruan Nanxing and said, this girl has been bothering me to play with you. Let her stay here and I'll pick her up later tonight. Although she's only 6 years old, she has great talent and can use ordinary spells, especially cleaning techniques. She's really good at using them and definitely can help you. Ruan Nanxing was stunned, the technique. You clenched your little fist and said seriously, sister, I cleaned up so thoroughly. Ruan Nanxing returns to life. Is it difficult to believe that this is a world of cultivating immortals? Before leaving, Lu Hui hesitated for a moment before asking, Nanxing, did you come down from the upper realm? Ruan Nanxing didn't know what the upper boundary in her mouth was, so she pursed her lips and said, actually. I have lost my memory, and I don't remember many things. Lu Hui's eyes flashed with surprise, followed by a hint of pity. She took her hand and patted it, comforting her, saying, don't be afraid. I'll remember sooner or later. I'll live a good life in the future and I'll get better. Ruan Nanxing was a little guilty of being so gently comforted. She could only lower her eyelashes and answer in a low voice, but saw Yu looking at her sympathetically below. Ruan Nanxing. Not really. After seeing off Lu Hui, she took a deep breath and brought Yu into the room of the courtyard. She chuckled softly and said, then please ask Yu for help. No problem. Yu was very happy and walked to the middle of the room, starting to play tricks with a very serious small face. Ruan Nanxing watched without blinking, afraid of missing something. At the moment when the Yu technique was completed, a whirlwind swept through the room out of thin air, sweeping through the entire room in a breath, rushing out of the door and disappearing into the distant sky. Looking back at the room, it was already spotless. Yu nodded in satisfaction and looked proudly at Ruan Nanxing, sister, that blanket is too dirty and can no longer be used. I'll throw it out together. Ruan Nanxing endured the shock in his heart and said a few words of praise to Yu. Afterwards, Ruan Nanxing used amnesia as an excuse to ask a lot of news about this world from Yu. This world is indeed a world where everyone cultivates immortals, but it is different from the fairy world she imagined. This place has just experienced a war of annihilation. More than 630 years ago, when external warcraft invaded, the immortal realm rose up in rebellion and almost collapsed. As a result, a part of the world and cultivators were separated and sent out as sparks of fire. The people who stayed behind fought to the death, but unexpectedly turned the tables and defeated the warcraft. Not to mention, the army relentlessly chased the warcraft to their lair. However, almost 7 years have passed and the army of the immortal realm has not returned yet. Although the people who stayed behind didn't say anything, they were still worried in their hearts. Secondly, due to fragmentation and war, the immortal realm is now riddled with wounds and holes. Spiritual plants, beasts, and stones are scarce, and even the heavenly way is incomplete. Ruan Nanxing frowned as he listened. What about the part that split out? Now that the war is over, they should also come back. Upon hearing this, Yu sighed like a young adult and said, I used to think the same way, but my mother said that the part that was separated has now become the upper realm. They are delicious, and the heavenly way has self-repaired. Who would care about our life or death? We are just the declining lower realm. Ruan Nanxing was dumbfounded and his mood was extremely complicated. Regardless of the world, whether one can cultivate immortality or not, people have inherent flaws. Protecting one's home is an instinct, and selfishness is also an instinct. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Scarce Resources. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Scarce Resources. With the help of Yu, the cleaning work of the courtyard came to an end very quickly. Not only the guest rooms and kitchen, but also the gatehouse and outer courtyard have been cleaned. Yu is full of enthusiasm and wants to clean up the backyard together. But Ruan Nanxing saw her face turning red and breathing heavily, afraid that she would be exhausted, so he stopped her. The two of them sat on the stone steps at the entrance of the courtyard, watching the sunset. Ruan Nanxing, who was poor and destitute, didn't have anything good to show his gratitude to the children. In the end, he could only fetch a bucket of water from the well in his home. Fortunately, there are cups in the wooden house, otherwise we would have to drink water from a bucket. Ruan Nanxing handed the water over and said dryly, "Drink some water, this water. It's very sweet." Such a big person, asking children to help with work, but not even a piece of candy. Ruan Nanxing was very ashamed, afraid of being despised. But Yu's expression was very surprised. "Can I drink it?" The next second, she asked nervously, "But, sister, will your water not be enough?" Ruan Nanxing instantly realized that various resources in the lower realm were scarce, and water was also very scarce. For cultivators in the lower realm, water was a very precious resource. She pushed the water glass to Yu and said, "Although you're drinking, sister doesn't have anything else, but the water pipe is enough." Yu immediately smiled and took a big sip of the water glass. While swallowing it, her already round and big eyes widened even wider. She was pleasantly surprised and said, "It's so sweet, drink it well." "If you like it, drink more," Ruan Nanxing said as he picked up the bucket directly. Yu nodded with a smile and took another big sip, saying, "Sister, your water has so much spiritual energy that it tastes much better than the water condensed by Aunt Ling." Ruan Nanxing was puzzled and asked, "Did it condense?" Yu said, "Aunt Ling is the only water attribute cultivator in our village. Only she can extract water spiritual power from the surroundings and condense it into water. Therefore, the water consumption of the villagers is fixed every day, and it needs to be very economical to be sufficient. Every time I drink water, I only dare to take a small sip." After speaking, Yu sighed heavily. Ruan Nanxing understood, but she didn't really understand environmental issues, especially since this is a fairy world, completely different from her previous world, so she could only sigh along. Not long after drinking water, Lu Hui came to pick up Yu. When she saw the bucket next to the two, she was clearly stunned for a moment. When she saw the cup with only a little water left in Yu's hand, her expression changed even more. Lu Hui took a step forward, grabbed the excellent water cup, and sternly said, "How can you drink my sister's water?" Yu was startled and her eyes immediately turned red. Ruan Nanxing quickly pulled Yu into her arms, blocking her ears and saying, "Aunt Hui, don't be angry. I gave you water to drink, and you helped me all afternoon. I don't have anything to eat here, only water." Lu Hui's expression was very anxious. "Nanxing, you just arrived. I don't know how precious the water in the lower world is. Your water will eventually be used up. How could you give it to outsiders for nothing?" "It's not an outsider," Ruan Nanxing said seriously. "Yu is the first person I met here, and I really like her." After a pause, she continued, "Auntie Hui, don't worry, my water won't run out in a short time, and I'm not short of it." Lu Hui's expression softened a bit, but she still sighed, "You'll know when you stay for a while. This water doesn't look impressive, but you can't do anything without it. It's not enough." After speaking, Lu Hui left with Yu. Ruan Nanxing looked at the bucket at her feet. Originally, she wanted Lu Hui to bring the water back, but in the end, she didn't speak up. She knew Lu Hui wouldn't want it. Lu Hui's ideas, like the environment in the lower world, cannot be changed in a short period of time. Ruan Nanxing entered the courtyard and closed the door, returning directly to her home. She first took a look at the vegetable garden. Just like at noon, there was not much change. She remembered Yu saying that there was plenty of spiritual energy in the well water, so she poured another bucket up and re-watered the ground. After finishing her work, she washed up and went to the wardrobe to change into loose clothes as pajamas, then went to bed. I probably went to bed early, and the next day at dawn, Ruan Nanxing woke up. She changed into a deep blue skirt that was as long as her calves, braided her long hair into a fishbone braid, and finally put on her short boots to fetch water from the backyard. Just as she bent down, she suddenly froze and then suddenly looked at the vegetable garden. The originally pitch-black land was already covered in a tender green, and the seeds she planted yesterday had sprouted. Ruan Nanxing's spirit was shaken, and he quickly went over to check. When he got closer, he realized that it was not just about sprouting, some had already grown a little seedlings. She had to doubt whether this was due to the well water, or was it the setting of the home system. Can't it really be that she has exceptional talent? She was so successful in farming for the first time, right? Ruan Nanxing pressed the floating idea in his heart and rationally divided the vegetable garden into 2 even pieces, one for watering and the other for it to survive on its own, which can be considered an experiment. Everything was tidy up, and Ruan Nanxing took a few sips of water before leaving his home. He also brought out a bed and decorated the guest room in a simple way, at least to make it look like it was occupied. As for the kitchen, Ruan Nanxing couldn't find a suitable decoration, so he had to ignore it for now. Anyway, cultivators probably don't use the kitchen much, do they all eat pigu-dan or something? Ruan Nanxing closed the gate of the courtyard and went down the mountain with peace of mind. As soon as I reached the foot of the mountain, I saw the curls of smoke rising from the distant village. Ruan Nanxing. This is completely different from the cultivation world she imagined. It's not surprising that she admitted to the wrong era when she first arrived. It was still early and the village was very quiet. Ruan Nanxing passed through half of the village and arrived outside Yang Yaoshi's courtyard. At this moment, Yang Yaoshi was flipping through medicinal herbs. When he heard the commotion, he turned his head to look over and was not surprised to see that it was Ruan Nanxing. He only asked in a low voice, "Has the wound on his hand healed?" Ruan Nanxing touched the smooth back of her hand and nodded nervously. In fact, the injury on her hand had healed the next morning, and there were no visible traces. After all, her body was made up of data, and everything had its own settings. Just like Cinderella's crystal shoes, they will return to their original state when time passes. Yang Yaoshi packed and organized the dried medicinal herbs, picked up a bamboo basket, and walked out. "The place for picking herbs is a bit far, have you brought anything to eat?" Ruan Nanxing shook his head and said, "Will it be very late to come back?" Yang Yaoshi. "If everything goes smoothly, I can come back in the first half of the night. If everything doesn't go smoothly, I'll have to wait until tomorrow." Ruan Nanxing has no objections, just. "Is there any danger?" Yang Yaoshi glanced at her and said firmly, "It shouldn't be considered dangerous for you." Ruan Nanxing relaxed and smiled a bit, "Then let's go." Yang Yaoshi silently led the way, thinking to himself that with Ruan Nanxing present, he might be able to explore deeper places. Ruan Nanxing knew nothing about this and set off with the expectation of further understanding this unfamiliar world. Yang Yaoshi. "With her, I can go even further." Ruan Nanxing. "Did you misunderstand something?" End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Tidal Forest. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Tidal Forest. Unlike what Ruan Nanxing thought, Yang Yaoshi remained very silent all the way and would not say a word unless necessary. Half an hour passed, not to mention learning about the new world, she didn't even know where she was. Yang Yaoshi only said they were going to the Tidal Forest. After holding it for a while, Ruan Nanxing coughed lightly and asked, "Where is the Tidal Forest?" As soon as the words fell, Yang Yaoshi in front turned his head and looked at her with a complex expression. You don't even know about tidal forest. Even people from the upper realm shouldn't know about tidal forest. When the two realms separated, tidal forest also split in half. Ruan Nanxing smiled awkwardly and said proficiently, I have lost my memory. I have forgotten many things. Yang Yaoshi suddenly realized and exclaimed in his heart that the methods of the upper realm were ruthless, while also educating Ruan Nanxing on science. The tidal forest is the largest forest in the fairy world, and it is particularly rich in resources. There are also many spiritual beasts living in it. There have been rumors before that there were divine beasts deep in the tidal forest, but they disappeared from sight until the invasion of the warcraft. In short, tidal forests are a well-known presence in the immortal world. Our village is quite close to the tidal forest. Ruan Nanxing nodded with an educated expression on his face. Yang Yaoshi shook his head and said, to be precise, our village is located in the tidal forest. After a pause, he sighed, or rather, it was in the former tidal forest. Ruan Nanxing was puzzled and said, what does that mean? Without further explanation, Yang Yaoshi only said, today's tidal forest is only 1/5 left. Ruan Nanxing was very surprised that it had shrunk so much, probably because of the previous war. After walking for about an hour, Ruan Nanxing saw a dense and towering forest, with a deep abyss stretching in front of the forest, cutting it off from this barren land. The abyss is several tens of meters wide, and as you approach, you can see that there are chains connected on both sides. Ruan Nanxing was taken aback. Couldn't this chain be just a bridge? Without waiting for her to ask, Yang Yaoshi answered the question by example. I saw Yang Yaoshi jump up and lightly land on the chain, then turn around without changing his face and say, this abyss is a bit special. You can't fly over it, you can only walk over the chain. Ruan Nanxing's mouth was bitter, but she was also a little grateful that she couldn't fly over, otherwise she could have turned back in place. But the current situation is not much better either. She leaned over to the edge of the abyss to explore, and the width of the chain was not much wider than that of the sole of her foot, and it was uneven. There was also no place to grip it above, in case it fell. Ruan Nanxing swallowed his saliva in fear. Looking up again, Yang Yaoshi quickly walked across from her, without any intention of waiting for her, obviously believing that she had the ability to go alone. Ruan Nanxing took a deep breath and stepped on the chain with his foot raised. She is not completely bottomless either. Her body is very strong, and even if she cannot step on it steadily and falls, she is confident in grasping the chain to save herself. The front was fine, stepping on it steadily. Ruan Nanxing took 2 steps and breathed a slight sigh of relief, feeling grateful that he had no fear of heights. But as we approached the middle section, the chain began to shake uncontrollably. Ruan Nanxing's face suddenly turned white. It is really difficult for an ordinary person who has been following the rules since childhood and has never experienced extreme sports to suddenly walk on a steel wire without a safety rope on a steep cliff. After stabilizing his center of gravity, Ruan Nanxing mustered up the courage and was about to lift his foot when Yang Yaoshi's urging voice came from across. Don't enjoy the scenery, come over quickly. Ruan Nanxing. Taking a breath, Ruan Nanxing focused her attention and cautiously stepped forward. As she reached the middle section, the chain swayed more and more. In order to maintain her center of gravity, she instinctively began to sway as well. Although it was a very thrilling scene, Yang Yaoshi didn't think so. He only felt that Ruan Nanxing's playfulness was too heavy, and he shook his head helplessly. He no longer urged Ruan Nanxing to come over and play. Fortunately, Ruan Nanxing finally walked safely to the opposite side. When she got off the chain, she realized later that her back was wet with cold sweat. The wind blew and it was cool, just like her mood when she just stood on the chain. The feeling of being down. Earth is so beautiful. Ruan Nanxing followed Yang Yaoshi with weak legs and continued to move forward, not too far away to the edge of the forest. Yang Yaoshi walked to the root of the tree and squatted down to look for it. Then he took out a sickle and cut a piece of grass, lifting it up and saying, Lian Zhen Chao, one of the main harvesting targets this time. Remember its appearance, and when picking, just cut it close to the bottom, being careful not to damage its roots. Lian Zhen Chao has a strong vitality. As long as the roots are not damaged, it can be harvested again in 2 months. Ruan Nanxing nodded and thought to himself, why is this Lian Zhen grass like a leek? Yang Yaoshi handed the sickle over and said, you come and give it a try. Ruan Nanxing took the sickle and learned from Yang Yaoshi's behavior just now. He flipped through the roots of the tree and indeed found Lian Zhen Chao. As soon as his hand touched it, the detailed information of Lian Zhen Chao appeared in his mind. Lian Zhen Chao, fond of shade, commonly found at the bottom of tree roots, has anti-inflammatory and analgesic effects. Ruan Nanxing's eyes flashed with surprise, as the ability to obtain information could still be used even after leaving the home. But in an instant, she figured out the key to it. The information about the elixir should have existed in the game character's database for a long time. Touching the elixir is equivalent to calling an instruction, like opening an existing document. The reason why it can be successfully called is because the appearance of the Lian Zhen grass in the fairy world is very similar to that in the game database. Ruan Nanxing used a sickle to stick to the root and cut off the Lian Zhen grass. At the same time, she was distracted and thought that perhaps she could make good use of this database to integrate into the world faster and better. Yang Yaoshi nodded and praised, not bad, let's continue walking inside. On the way, please be careful. If you see a single blade of grass, cut it off. Ruan Nanxing agreed. The two continued walking deep into the tidal forest, and in order to test the information in the database, Ruan Nanxing secretly touched many things. For example, walking around and touching the trunk of a tree, or touching the grass next to it while harvesting herbs, but there is very little feedback. I don't know how far into the forest, but when Ruan Nanxing finally touched a small yellow flower, he received information again. The small yellow flower has a very similar appearance to ordinary wildflowers, and has the effect of enhancing spiritual power and accelerating cultivation. It is the main medicine of the spirit-enhancing pill and can also be used to refine advanced pills. Ha! Yang Yaoshi exclaimed in surprise, is this the little yellow flower? Ruan Nanxing grabbed the little yellow flower and said, it should be. Yang Yaoshi looked at Ruan Nanxing with an astonished gaze and said, have you ever been exposed to spiritual medicine before? Ruan Nanxing said vaguely, maybe. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Big Misunderstandings. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Big Misunderstandings. Yang Yaoshi was pleasantly surprised by Ruan Nanxing's knowledge of herbs, and whenever she saw a different kind of spiritual medicine, she would recognize it. Ruan Nanxing could only frown and make an effort to recall, saying, I'll take a closer look. Then he squatted down and touched the elixir, and answered fluently. Yang Yaoshi nodded with satisfaction every time, and then continued to search for the next herb. Ruan Nanxing is also very satisfied. This way, the efficiency is much higher, it's better than her blindly touching one by one. So far, a total of 16 different herbs have been found, and each time Ruan Nanxing is able to successfully retrieve their information, indicating a high overlap rate between game data and immortal species, at least in the area of spiritual medicine. After answering these questions, no one will doubt that she is not from this world anymore. Ruan Nanxing became more and more firm in her previous thoughts. After returning this time, she may be able to study the alchemy furnace. Unconsciously, the two of them had already entered a very deep part of the forest. Yang Yaoshi was very familiar with this area and effortlessly found a flat open space. He said, let's rest here and take a walk deeper in the afternoon. Ruan Nanxing naturally has no objection. Currently, it seems that this forest is quite safe. Thinking of this, she suddenly froze and realized the strangeness of the tidal forest. This is a forest, why haven't any animals seen it? Even if you can't see it, there should be some shouting, right? But here it is very quiet, at most only the rustling sound of the wind blowing through the leaves. Isn't it true that there are many spirit beasts here? Why haven't you seen one for so long? Ruan Nanxing couldn't help but ask. Upon hearing this, Yang Yaoshi sighed and said, due to the invasion of Warcraft, many spirit beasts have become extinct, and those who are still alive have also hid. Spirit beasts are rare now, and perhaps their traces can still be found in the central area of the Tidal forest. Ruan Nanxing frowned and said, did they all die in the hands of Warcraft? Yang Yaoshi said softly, to be precise, they have all been eaten. Ruan Nanxing was greatly surprised and said, are you eating extinct? Yang Yaoshi nodded and said, Warcraft has a very big appetite and eats everything. Not only spirit beasts, but also many plants have been eaten. The reason why the fairy world will become what it is today is largely because Warcraft is so edible. Ruan Nanxing imagined that if someone could be called a beast, their body size would definitely not be small and they would eat everything. Isn't that a giant locust? Enlarge the image of the locust plague in your mind by dozens or hundreds of times. Ruan Nanxing couldn't help but take a breath and got goosebumps all over her body. Fortunately, now that the Warcraft has been repelled, how else would she survive? 80% of the time can only be spent in the home system. Yang Yaoshi was amused by her expression and then let out a light sigh, saying, when the overwhelming monsters attacked, it was indeed terrifying. Fortunately, there were countless powerful cultivators in our immortal world. Even though the process was difficult, we still managed to hold on to our own home in the end. Ruan Nanxing nodded vigorously. Although this was not her world and she had never participated in that war, the country where her original world was located had also experienced aggressive wars. Therefore, she empathized with it and was proud and moved by the monks in the immortal realm. After saying a few words, herbalist Yang took out 2 rice and vegetable roll and gave one to Ruan Nanxing. It's not delicious, he said. Although Ruan Nanxing had no need for food, she politely took it over and wanted to repay with some water. However, she didn't have a suitable container to hold it, and if she used a bucket, she was afraid of scaring others. In the end, we can only give up. Let's work hard and cut more herbs later. Thinking about it, Ruan Nanxing took a bite of rice and vegetable roll, which was unexpectedly delicious. There is the sweetness of rice, the fragrance of vegetables, and a faint salty taste. Although the taste is very light, for Ruan Nanxing, who has not eaten for several days, it is simply a delicious food on earth. What kind of dish is this? Ruan Nanxing swallowed the rice in his mouth and asked. Yang Yaoshi. It's not a vegetable, it's a kind of herb that can be called gone and replenish energy. He casually pulled a slender green grass beside him. It's everywhere in the Tidal forest. If you like it, you can pick some back. Ruan Nanxing took over and unexpectedly did not trigger any information. She looked curiously and found that it was no different from wild grass. It was probably too ordinary, so the database did not collect it. Yang Yaoshi said again, you can uproot a few plants later and see if you can plant them on the mountain. If you can, you won't be afraid of not eating them in the future. These things are very easy to feed and grow quickly. They can grow one in less than 2 months. Ruan Nanxing nodded in agreement. There is indeed a relatively flat open space on the left side of the courtyard. If you go back and pour some well water, you should be able to plant. After finishing their meal, the two of them rested for a while before continuing on their journey. As he walked and collected herbs, time passed quickly. By the time Ruan Nanxing regained consciousness, the sky had already become somewhat dim. Are you going to spend the night in the forest today? Ruan Nanxing asked. Yang Yaoshi nodded and said, find a place to rest and leave tomorrow. It was a bit dark all around, and the forest suddenly became gloomy. Ruan Nanxing was a bit scared, and she calmly approached Yang Yaoshi. Did you always come by yourself before? Staying here alone for the night? Yang Yaoshi squinted at her and said, this is the farthest time I have entered the Tidal forest. I used to be afraid of encountering danger, but this time with you, I have more confidence in my heart. Ruan Nanxing was stunned for a moment and said, why? Yang Yaoshi naturally said, as an old alchemist with half a body buried in the ground, my strength is limited, so how can I be safe? This time you are here, you can still resist danger. Ruan Nanxing's expression was somewhat strange. Where did you see that I could resist? Yang Yaoshi paused and looked back at her with an unclear expression. Can't you resist? Of course not, Ruan Nanxing answered very positively. Yang Yaoshi's face changed. What cultivation are you? Ruan Nanxing said truthfully, I have no cultivation. Impossible. Yang Yaoshi firmly said, your body is stronger than most cultivators, and your cultivation is definitely not low. Ruan Nanxing opened her mouth and didn't know how to explain about her abnormal body. She could only close her eyes and throw out the universal answer, I don't remember. Upon hearing this, Yang Yaoshi's face turned pale, but he couldn't blame Ruan Nanxing. He had a preconception and forgot to confirm. He believed that even if Ruan Nanxing came down from the upper realm, his cultivation would definitely be much stronger than him. That's why he wanted to bring people to collect herbs and go deeper. I didn't expect such a big black dragon to come out. The sky has completely darkened now, and the night in the tidal forest is not as calm as during the day. The two of them were speechless, but in the end, Ruan Nanxing broke the silence and asked, now, what should we do? Yang Yaoshi remained silent for a long time, and the current situation is really a dilemma. Requesting votes. Guys. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Crisis Attacks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Crisis Attacks. In the end, the two of them stayed in the tidal forest. Yang Yaoshi cautiously retreated a little distance with Ruan Nanxing, and then found a relatively flat place to land his foot. However, the two did not immediately rest, and without military protection, they had to take some protective measures first to ensure a safe night. Yang Yaoshi instructed Ruan Nanxing to shovel away all the surrounding grass and create a quarantine zone. After finishing his work, Ruan Nanxing's mind instantly flashed with the circle that Sun Wukong had drawn for Tang Monk before leaving. If he left the circle, he would die. But Sun Wukong's circle has magic, what's the use of this circle? The next second, Yang Yaoshi took out a porcelain bottle from his sleeve and sprinkled a circle of black and gray powder along the isolation belt. Then, with a light flick of his finger, the ignition light fell on the powder. With a whoosh, the entire isolation belt was ignited, and the flames surged 1 meter high. Ruan Nanxing was startled and said, since there are no spiritual beasts, why ignite them? In her only knowledge of wilderness survival, igniting them is to drive away the beasts. Yang Yaoshi shook his head without explaining, only saying, just in case, it's best not to use it. The area enclosed by the isolation belt has a diameter of about 2 meters, making it easy for two people to sit. Ruan Nanxing and herbalist Yang sat down face to face and ate together. After finishing the meal, Yang Yaoshi took out a water bag, restrained himself and took 2 sips before quickly putting it away and saying, I only have this water bag, so I won't give it to you. It's not suitable. Ruan Nanxing. Thank you, I didn't originally want it. Seeing her expression as usual, Yang Yaoshi breathed a sigh of relief and said, I'm used to meditating and practicing at night. Please pay attention to the surroundings and wake me up promptly if there are any problems. Ruan Nanxing nodded and stared at Yang Yaoshi with some anticipation. What would people in the immortal world look like when practicing? Yang Yaoshi sat cross-legged in place, with his back straight, and began practicing with both hands pinching the formula. Ruan Nanxing stared for more than 10 minutes, but Yang Yaoshi remained motionless, without any celestial anomalies, as if he had fallen asleep. Ruan Nanxing was a bit disappointed. Just as he was about to turn his head, he suddenly noticed that Yang Yaoshi was surrounded by an invisible airflow that swirled down from his head and finally penetrated his abdomen, which was the location of the dantian. Ruan Nanxing was very interested in this and stared at it for a long time. She found that the airflow around Yang Yaoshi's body would initially gather more and more, and the absorption speed of the elixir would also increase faster. However, after reaching a critical point, it no longer gathered and remained in a relatively balanced state, supplementing as much as it absorbed. Ruan Nanxing is a bit envious, but her body is mostly incapable of cultivation. With a sigh, Ruan Nanxing stood up and looked around. Although it was gloomy, it was still very quiet and didn't seem to be in danger. Looking at Yang Yaoshi again, it shouldn't have ended for a while. Taking the opportunity, Ruan Nanxing returned to his home and took a look at the vegetable garden. A whole day passed, and there was indeed a difference between the two vegetable gardens. The seedlings that have been watered with well water are noticeably taller than those that have not been watered. But the seedlings without well water also grow, but it's not very obvious. The conclusion is that things in the garden can grow normally without watering, but after watering, they grow faster. Ruan Nanxing had a judgment in her heart and quickly took a sip of water before leaving her home. The whole journey lasted only 5 minutes, but it still made her tremble with fear of being discovered. Fortunately, 5 minutes is not enough to make any changes in the outside world. Ruan Nanxing breathed a sigh of relief and sat back in place, yawning shortly after. I had a huge physical exertion today, and I rarely felt tired. But this feeling didn't last long. After midnight, Ruan Nanxing was all excited and immediately full of energy. She was momentarily stunned, then realized that it was past 12 o'clock and her stamina was reset to full capacity. Ruan Nanxing couldn't help but laugh and cry. She was about to close her eyes and squint for a while, but she didn't even let anyone sleep. The long night was long, and Ruan Nanxing was extremely spirited and idle, only able to recall the herbal knowledge he had received that day in his mind. Her memory has been very good since childhood. As long as she remembers things with her heart, she can remember them for a long time, even if she suddenly remembers them a few years later, they are still clear. Although it was a whole day of receiving new knowledge, it only took a moment to truly review it. Ruan Nanxing sighed. Perhaps she could wake up Yang Yaoshi and borrow a book to read. Just as she was contemplating feasibility, the silent forest suddenly heard a continuous, rustling sound, as if something was dragging through the forest. Ruan Nanxing was instantly alert and stood up to look in the direction of the sound. The tree shadows were heavy and pitch black, making it impossible to see anything clearly, but the rustling sound became louder and louder, as if it was constantly approaching. Ruan Nanxing was a bit scared. She dared not speak, afraid of disturbing something in the dark. She could only lightly approach Yang Yaoshi and touch his shoulder. Almost at the moment of touch, the latter opened her eyes. Ruan Nanxing quickly made a gesture of silence, indicating that he should listen carefully. Yang Yaoshi listened attentively, and his face suddenly changed. He quickly got up to check, but almost instantly confirmed the source of the crisis, its blood thread vine. Ruan Nanxing exclaimed in surprise, "Is it a plant?" With a target in mind, when she looked over again, she quickly discovered more than one slender insect-like vine on the ground. At first glance, there were about a dozen. Although it was her first time encountering a climbing plant in her life, she was surprised and breathed a big sigh of relief. If it were a plant, it would be easy. We're in the fire, they can't get in. Upon hearing this, Yang Yaoshi shook his head with a serious expression and said, "Blood thread vine has extremely strong fire resistance. Before it is ignited, we will be pulled out of the fire circle first." As if to verify his words, blood thread vine suddenly accelerated and rushed into the circle of fire, quickly wrapping around their ankles, tightening and dragging outwards. Ruan Nanxing only felt a pain in her ankle, her body unstable, and she fell directly to the ground. Then a strong force came, and in a whirlwind, she was dragged out. On the other hand, Yang Yaoshi's situation was much better than hers, and he was also entangled in his ankle, but he still had the strength to take out his sickle to save himself. When he got out of trouble and went to see Ruan Nanxing again, there was only a black shadow left. Yang Yaoshi hesitated in his eyes, but in the end, he gritted his teeth and chased after him. People were brought out by him, and he couldn't refuse to save them in the face of death. Moreover, after spending a day together, he developed a bit of talent for Ruan Nanxing, and couldn't bear her to die like this. Although he may not be able to return for both of them once he goes, the speed of blood thread vine was very fast, and Yang Yaoshi didn't know how long he had been chasing it. Ruan Nanxing in front suddenly stopped and was suddenly lifted up, hanging upside down on a tree. Yang Yaoshi quickly swung out the sickle in his hand and smoothly cut through the blood vine hanging with Ruan Nanxing. Ruan Nanxing dropped to the ground with a sound of ouch. Before she could get up, dozens of bloodline vines suddenly jumped up and tied her tightly from head to foot like zongzi. At this moment, Yang Yaoshi finally saw the situation in front of him, and his scalp exploded instantly, making him numb. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Midnight Earthquakes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Midnight Earthquakes. The ground was densely covered with blood vines climbing everywhere, chasing people to their lair. Yang Yaoshi stood frozen on the spot, lamenting in his heart. My life is at rest. Blood thread vine obviously also noticed the unwelcome guest, and the vine was eager to climb towards Yang Yaoshi's feet. At this point, Ruan Nanxing had already entered a semi-unconscious state, with her blood vine tightly intertwined, and she couldn't breathe at all. Her mind was dazed as she thought that life in the new world had not yet begun and was about to end. On his deathbed, the pitch-black world suddenly lit up with a flame. At first it was only the size of a fist, but in his breath, the flame surged higher than a human, and the next second it ignited the entire world with a blazing force. At that time, Yang Yaoshi was about to make a desperate effort when his eyes, soaked in vicissitudes, suddenly became sharp. He lifted his palm and wanted to pinch the formula, but the light blue flames spread one step ahead of him. Yang Yaoshi was stunned and looked at the sudden appearance of the flames, suddenly realizing that Ruan Nanxing just didn't remember whether she had practiced, but it didn't mean she had no cultivation at all. This is not life. Threatening, it just exploded. Watching the twisted and burning blood vine in the fire, which eventually turned into flying ash, Yang Yaoshi breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, this girl erupted in time, and he could still live a few more years peacefully. In no time, the blood thread vine was burned to death by a series of roots, and the light blue flames quickly retracted as if conscious, finally sinking into Ruan Nanxing's eyebrows. On the ground, Ruan Nanxing's eyebrows and eyes relaxed and he lay quietly, as if he had fallen asleep. The previously worn wound on his ankle had also healed. Yang Yaoshi frowned and whispered, "It's rare to see someone who cultivates the upper dantian." After a pause, he smiled slowly again. The fire attribute of the upper dantian is so good in spiritual medicine. God treats me well. Ruan Nanxing slept until dawn. When she woke up, she felt incredibly comfortable and warm, but the next second she suddenly smelled a smell of burning. She suddenly opened her eyes and sat up, with a hint of fear in her expression. Wake up. Ruan Nanxing Shua turned to see that young herbalist was calmly eating. She was a little unresponsive. Last night. We have been attacked by the blood thread vine, said Yang Yaoshi. It's really not a dream. But how did they survive? Ruan Nanxing continued to see Yang Yaoshi. It's not me, Yang Yaoshi said truthfully. You saved us. Ruan Nanxing was completely confused. Until Yang Yaoshi explained everything about what had happened to her, Ruan Nanxing remained skeptical. Is there any secret hidden in this body that she doesn't know? Yang Yaoshi didn't say much when he saw the situation. He only said, once your memory recovers, it will be fine. He stood up and said, it's getting late. Let's go back to the village. Ruan Nanxing nodded absent-mindedly, constantly recalling the setting of the game characters. Did she miss anything? Where exactly did the flame in Yang Yaoshi's mouth come from? The speed of the return journey is very fast, as there is no need to collect herbs. As noon approaches, we arrive at the chain of the abyss. The second time she stepped onto the chain, Ruan Nanxing's courage was noticeably increased. She didn't know if it was an illusion. She felt that her balance had improved, or maybe because the wind wasn't as strong today, the chain wasn't shaking very clearly. In short, I walked much smoother than the first time. Ruan Nanxing secretly said, walking on a tightrope is indeed a skillful trick that can be practiced. In the afternoon, the two of them returned to the village and coincidentally met Yu, who was playing with friends at the village entrance. From afar, Yu saw Ruan Nanxing and ran over to her friend, pouting and saying, "Sister. I thought you had left." Ruan Nanxing pulled her slightly sweaty hair from her temples behind her ear and smiled, saying, "Sister won't leave. At least, she won't leave this village until she fully understands the world. This is the fairyland, which urgently needs to be rebuilt after the war. As an outsider, she may encounter some danger if she goes out and runs around." Upon receiving a vague promise, Yu let go as if she had just seen Yang Yaoshi. She exclaimed with joy, "Grandpa Yang, have you gone to collect medicine again?" She looked at Ruan Nanxing and suddenly realized, "You took your sister to collect medicine. This is the agreed-upon reward for drugging that day, but she is young and forgetful, and she has long forgotten." Yang Yaoshi snorted lightly, "You only know a lot." He looked at Ruan Nanxing and said, "If you have nothing to do in the future, you can come to the clinic and sit more." After a moment, he moved his gaze away and said, "If you're not interested, that's okay." Ruan Nanxing felt that he had something to say, but she didn't understand for a moment. However, she was indeed very interested in medicinal materials and the like, but, "Do you know how to refine pills?" Ruan Nanxing asked seriously. Upon hearing these words, Yang Yaoshi's expression suddenly became complex, nostalgic, regretful, and relieved. All of which eventually turned into a faint smile, "I guess I know." Ruan Nanxing's spirit shook and he said, "There will be more interruptions in the future." Yang Yaoshi suddenly laughed, nodded in satisfaction, and lifted his foot back to the clinic. Ruan Nanxing watched him leave and then lowered her head to say a few words to Yu. The little girl was mentally worried about playing games with her friends and hurriedly made an appointment with her to go to the mountain tomorrow. She turned around and ran away. Ruan Nanxing chuckled and shook her head, saying that children's happiness is so simple. Returning to the mountain, it's still early. Ruan Nanxing first inspected the vegetable garden of his home, and after half a day had passed, the sunflowers had already bloomed and the leaves of the burning lotus had also spread. Perhaps tomorrow, the spiritual medicine in the garden will be harvested, Of course, only half. After some thought, she went back to the house and changed into sportswear, put on her boots, and re-watered the noticeably short piece of herb in the well, so that the entire vegetable garden could be harvested tomorrow. Nodding in satisfaction, Ruan Nanxing hurriedly arrived at the empty space next to the courtyard. She first built a 3-meter square piece of land with stones, then poured a large amount of well water, soaking each piece of land in the water. When the water was almost saturated, she took out a small shovel to dig a palm-sized pit, planted the sweet potato brought back from the tidal deep forest, and finally cultivated the soil. Ruan Nanxing muttered to himself with great anticipation, "We must strive to live." Perhaps feeling uneasy about the newly irrigated medicinal field, Ruan Nanxing did not return home to rest that night. Instead, he slept in the guest room, eagerly anticipating the changes in the field tomorrow morning, and fell asleep soundly. However, life is always full of surprises, especially when you are particularly eager for something. There will always be people or things to break your expectations. On the midday of the moon, in the quiet of the night, a loud noise accompanied the strong vibration woke up Ruan Nanxing, who was sleeping soundly. Her first reaction was an earthquake, and her movements quickly ran out, completely subconscious. It wasn't until she ran out of the courtyard that she realized it, and the vibration had already stopped. Ruan Nanxing breathed a sigh of relief, then turned his head and his whole body froze. Next to the quadrangle courtyard, she had been working hard all afternoon and had placed her hopes in the highly hopeful field of medicine, which was no longer square and upright. See you. Got it. Instead, there is a large pit with a diameter of 3 meters. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Unlocking New Features. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Unlocking New Features. After a while, Ruan Nanxing finally confirmed that she was not dreaming. She felt extremely heartbroken and covered her heart, approaching the big pit. There are no trees on the mountain, and the moonlight shines unobstructed. Therefore, Ruan Nanxing saw very clearly, with a person lying half buried and half covered at the bottom of the pit. She was taken aback, couldn't help but look up at the sky, then down at the bottom of the pit, and finally nervously swallowed her saliva. Someone fell from the sky. Is there still a possibility of being alive? Ruan Nanxing was a bit scared. She had lived for 30 years and was so close to the corpse for the first time. Perhaps she should wait until tomorrow morning and go to the village to find Yang Yaoshe to come and take a look. She took 2 steps back and couldn't see the bottom of the pit. Her nervousness eased a bit, and as she was about to turn around and return to the courtyard, she suddenly froze again. This is the fairyland. The people here are different from those in her original world. They are invincible, flying and escaping from the sky. If they fall from the sky, will they really fall to death? What if I just fainted? What if there's still breath? Ruan Nanxing struggled incessantly, feeling that she should go down and have a check. Up. After standing in place for half a day of psychological construction, Ruan Nanxing let out a heavy breath, turned around and returned to the edge of the pit, estimated the height, and jumped off with his eyes closed. Vaguely, Ruan Nanxing seemed to hear a muffled groan, but it was also a slight illusion to her. She carefully opened her eyes and took a cold breath. She stepped on someone else. Ruan Nanxing suddenly panicked. She didn't fall to death, but was trampled to death by her, did she? But there's no way, the bottom of the pit is just so big, it's all occupied by this person. She carefully moved to the side, trying to avoid the people under her feet as much as possible, but the effect was minimal. The soil around the pit was scattered, and she couldn't help but slide down. Ruan Nanxing moved a few times, but finally ran out of patience and squatted down directly on the chest and abdomen of the person. This person's face was covered in dirt, but fortunately her nose was not buried. She reached out to sniff, and it was very gentle, as if it was about to break. She breathed a sigh of relief and was still alive, but at the same time felt even more guilty. She quickly got up and pressed herself against the edge of the pit, trying not to step on him. Then she started worrying again, how could she get people out? We can't just leave the bottom of the pit unattended. If we don't, will this person die tomorrow morning? Ruan Nanxing doesn't even have a life-saving pill in his hand, the only thing with spiritual power is the well water. After thinking about it, she returned to her home and fetched a bucket of well water, filled a cup with a little water, and before leaving, she even pulled a burning lotus. Burning Tian Luo can promote blood circulation and remove blood stasis. Although eating it raw may not have a good effect, it is better than not eating it. When she came out, Ruan Nanxing didn't stabilize her center of gravity, stumbled, and stepped on someone again. 1 time she was born and 2 times she was mature, and this time her guilt wasn't as heavy. She muttered, I was trying to save you. She squatted down and scanned the dirt on the other person's face while stepping on their chest and abdomen. The man's facial features were fully exposed, with deep eye sockets, a high and straight nose bridge, and a sharp jawline. He was a handsome man with a tough appearance. Ruan Nanxing admired for 2 seconds, reached out and rudely broke open his tightly pursed lips, poured some water in, and waited for someone to swallow it. She continued pouring. After feeding him half a cup of water, Ruan Nanxing collected the cup and took out the burning sky luo to feed him. However, after looking at the burning heavenly luo, which was even bigger than a man's face, Ruan Nanxing frowned. It's so big, and the unconscious person can't chew it, they definitely can't eat it. With a sigh, Ruan Nanxing thought to himself that it was really troublesome, but he patiently returned to his home. He ground the burning Tian Luo in the alchemy room, poured out the juice, and then came out to drink it for the man. Afterwards, Ruan Nanxing clapped his hands and crawled out of the pit. The saying goes, do everything according to fate. She has already worked hard to save her. If this man doesn't survive until tomorrow morning, then even if his fate is like this, it's not her fault. Of course, Ruan Nanxing still hopes that he can survive, at least he has to take responsibility for the medicine field that he smashed. After all this fuss, the sky was covered with fish belly white, and Ruan Nanxing didn't plan to sleep anymore. He went back to his home and took a bath, changed into clean sportswear, and then went to the vegetable garden to start collecting medicine. The sunflower has fully bloomed, the size of a fist, somewhat like a miniature version of a sunflower, but with longer and denser petals and a faint floral fragrance that makes one feel refreshed and happy. Sunflowers are only useful for that one flower. Ruan Nanxing held scissors and carefully cut off each flower, stacking them aside. It's much easier to burn tianluo, just uproot it directly and pile it up in a pile. As she pulled, Ruan Nanxing thought to herself that she would need to tidy up a space in the alchemy room for storing medicinal herbs, and perhaps she would also need to prepare a container like a bamboo basket. But when Ruan Nanxing pulled up the last burning sky lily, a thick white mist suddenly rose up in her home, and she suddenly became blind, unable to see anything except for the vast expanse of white. Ruan Nanxing didn't dare to move around, but fortunately, this situation only lasted for a few breaths, and the white mist suddenly dissipated like when it appeared. Ruan Nanxing blinked in confusion before getting up. In front of her, behind the vegetable garden, there was a small house with a round bottom and pointed roof, which looked very much like a granary. I don't know. Ruan Nanxing was a bit surprised. The home system does have a warehouse setting, and it will automatically unlock after the first harvest of plants. But she didn't expect that this feature would still be preserved in this already connected home with reality. Does this mean that other functions can also be implemented someday in the future? Ruan Nanxing walked quickly towards the warehouse, pushed open the door and glanced at it. Inside were 3 rows of cabinets arranged vertically from left to right, each row having 5 floors up and down. Ruan Nanxing smiled and turned to the vegetable garden to pick up the sunflowers, placing them in the top drawer of the first row. The drawer doesn't look big, but there is mustard space inside. Over 20 flowers are placed inside, occupying less than 1/3 of the space. Closing the drawer, Ruan Nanxing saw the 3 words sunflower appearing outside the drawer, shining brightly and very eye-catching. Later, she placed the burning heavenly luo in the drawer next to the sunflower, and after closing it, the name of the burning heavenly luo also appeared on the outside of the drawer. Humanized design. Ruan Nanxing touched the words on it and smiled with satisfaction. This design is her idea. The name on the outside of the drawer is not fixed, but will change according to what is placed inside. Now she has fewer types of herbs, but when she grows more in the future, the importance of this function will be reflected. After thinking for a moment, Ruan Nanxing closed the warehouse door and went to the mailbox at the entrance of the courtyard. After opening it, he indeed found 2 more packages of seeds. As expected, there were no new varieties, but still the sunflowers and the scorching pineapple. Ruan Nanxing remembers to repeat planting 3 times, and only after the upgrade of the home will new varieties appear, while also unlocking the breeding function. Ruan Nanxing returned to the vegetable garden holding the seeds, his eyes full of fighting spirit. End of this chapter.